According to a study on post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, within the military by Gregory Garsky, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are producing a new generation at risk for PTSD in numbers not seen since Vietnam. PTSD is a chronic and disabling psychiatric disorder that may develop following a traumatic incident where they experienced, witnessed, or were confronted with an event involving actual or threatened death, serious physical injury, or threat to one's physical integrity. Symptoms include trauma in dreams and recurring images, a distinct lack of involvement or engagement in normal life, depression, depressed satisfaction with intimate relationships, troubled marital relationships, and an increased sexual dissatisfaction. The problem this creates for society is multifaceted. For the veteran, PTSD victims show an increase in suicide, violence, and substance abuse. As a result, families are directly affected, as a rise in divorce illustrates its toll on the marriage. Society on the whole must also face the challenge of how to care for such large numbers of men and women with often debilitating conditions. According to Garsky, due to the magnitude of the PTSD numbers, no one agency or profession can provide the necessary mental health services needed. War is a disease that kills and maims, not just tearing apart soldiers' bodies, but also ravaging their minds. As the military continues to have a military presence in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, it must also come to grips with the products of war at home, a new generation of troubled veterans. This is a huge social problem. It was recorded by the military health system that in the calendar years 2003 to 2007, 39,365 patients were diagnosed with PTSD. Why is there such an increase in the number of PTSD cases? For current deployed troops, the wartime environment promotes a chronic expectation of a hostile encounter, and these individuals are more likely to experience repeated events with little to no time to process the trauma before returning to battlefield. Returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan describe feelings of helplessness to alter the course of the potential lethal events, being exposed to severe combat where buddies were killed or injured, and having personally killed enemy combats and possibly innocent bystanders, of being exposed to uncontrollable and unpredictable life-threatening attacks such as ambushes or roadside bombs, of experiencing post-combat exposure to consequences of combat such as observing or handling the remains of civilians, enemy soldiers, or U.S. and Allied personnel, of being exposed to sights, sounds, and smells of dying men and women, and of observing refugees, devastated communities, and homes destroyed by combat. Of the 39,000 veterans previously reported by the mental health system, only 10% of males and 26% of female personnel sought treatment as a result of avoidant combat coping strategies, hoping that it would just go away, of frequent deployments that destabilize living arrangements, and of fears that seeking treatment would impact their careers. As a result, many of the survivors with PTSD cope with their symptoms by living isolated and avoidant lives, which are contributing to a growing homeless population. Individuals often resort to self-medication with alcohol and substance abuse in order to numb themselves to emotional relationships and family and friends. As thousands of military returnees are returning home with serious mental disorders that will not only affect the soldier, but his or his family system as well. Military members of the mental health community, social institutions such as churches and support centers must become agents for healing and reintegration back into society. The following excerpt was taken from an interview done by the author of this paper with a mother of a 23-year-old Marine who was diagnosed with PTSD, taken off the front lines for a time to rest. He has just recently been cleared to return to battle.
You know, he was in that fight or flight mode for 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
Then all of a sudden one day you just kind of up and say, okay, you're going back to normalcy, what we consider normalcy. And he literally every day knew that that could be his last day. You know, and I think that when you live that type of life, you don't know how to come off of that almost adrenaline rush. He, I knew, and I think I had talked to you about one of my biggest fears with him coming back. I could already see change in him just talking to him through satellite phones is that adrenaline rush running all the time. Their lack of sleep, he didn't eat. They didn't have people making food for them like they do on the bases. So for him, even just their eating, they lived on MREs for almost a full month before they could get the Army to drop food into them. So he wasn't eating the way he should eat. They don't sleep. He had talked to me about some of the stuff that he had seen where they would be woke up in the middle of the night and they would do gunfire, and they would be shooting, and so in their underwear, basically in t-shirts, is how they slept. That's what they fought in. They didn't even have the ability to have clothes, but if they went to sleep, to even get into a relaxed mode, it's that constant fight or flight.
Frankly, there does not appear to be any one individual or group that benefits from the rising problem of PTSD casualties. Certainly the victims do not benefit in any way. As a matter of fact, they have not only risked their lives in service of their country, but now they must endure potentially lifelong ramifications and often guilt and shame from that service. Their families only serve to lose, as the sons, daughters, husbands, and wives they proudly sent off to war are not the same individuals that return home to them. The military loses, and that often individuals must be discharged early and require, or at least should require, and receive medical and emotional support. The government has nothing to gain from the negative press and mismanagement that is starting to arise from insufficient funding and services available for veterans. And finally, society loses, as it is faced with thousands of young men and women returning from war, broken, misunderstood, and often ignored victims, fighting a daily struggle just to survive. As with any social problem, the handling of victims suffering from PTSD must be handled carefully. Since no one serves to gain anything from addressing this problem, it will have to come from the voices of the masses. As with any group of individuals shown as a disservice, their voice must gain momentum among the military and government who hold the resources and power to make change. As veterans, families, and concerned individuals with mental health and social community, as they speak up about the mistreatment and overlooked victims, slowly change can be effected. Whether it was in women's suffrage or in civil rights movement, it was the many voices of the individuals joined together that eventually made a difference, demanding change. Instead of making things more difficult for members of the military, by looking beyond bureaucracy, they could actually make a big difference by following the procedures to see that they actually are complicating and frustrating the people they're trying to serve. The following expert is an illustration of this topic.
Everything's difficult, even for me to deal with some of this stuff. And instead of being like a special power of attorney, I do have power. I have one for the cars, I have one for his taxes, I have one for general. But every place I have to turn in to handle any of this stuff, I have to turn it in to their legal department, and then their legal department maybe
1 to 2, maybe even 3 weeks, may get back to me and say, okay, yeah, we're going to accept the power of attorney. Now you can move on into helping him clear stuff up. Because of a lot of the identity thefts and everything, have put stuff out there for the kids. So now Curtis is racking an interest. He's racking up penalties. Whatever the case may be, it's very, very difficult. From registering his vehicle to paying to doing his taxes, everything is difficult. Turning his phone off. So when he's home, because he's on a deployment or whatever, he can come home, hook up his phone, have the same phone number, and have it discontinued. But to get it to be discontinued again, I have to go through, it usually takes me a 15 to 20 minute phone call trying to jump through all the hoops to get his phone put back into a military turnoff so he can retain his number. Nothing is easy. Everything is so difficult. Even to get him home for my father's funeral and stuff. We couldn't just call him and tell him this is going on. I had to contact the Red Cross. And from the Red Cross, we had to contact his unit. From his unit. I mean, I've never been in a situation that has been so... Some things are supposed to be helping the military, but it actually is a hindrance to some degree because it just adds a little more red tape to everything he does. And it's just crazy. They can't take taxes when you're, out of another country, but you may owe, it's just like, but yet your interest is compounding, it's adding up your penalties, and it's just like, you're not really doing them any favors whatsoever.